move on.
Shereen on BBC Radio Scotland.
Coming up in the programme, we'll be looking at the coverage of the death of Loren Scott and reflect on the life of Clarissa Dixon-Wright, who also died this week. And the makers of 2012 turn their attention to lampooning the BBC in the new mockumentary W1A. But does it work? First, taking tourists out whale watching, living with wolves, tending to bear cubs, teaching baby otters how to swim. It's fair to say that Sara Frost lives a life less ordinary. And equally fair to say that she's never been a city girl. Sara grew up in rural England, where as a child she immersed herself in nature and the countryside. So it's hardly surprising that when she headed off to university in Newcastle, she opted to study zoology. A year after graduating, Sara packed her bags and left to work with wildlife in a remote area of British Columbia. She told me about the move and why her life was never going to be the same again.
I moved to Canada for a year and a half.
As you do?
Yeah, well, I just thought if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly. I applied for a visa and I mentioned it to my parents, and I don't think they thought I was serious when I said, I'm going to go to Canada and I want to go and live with wolves. Then my visa came through and I booked my flights and I just said, Mum, Dad, I'm going. See you in a while. And I went off and I absolutely loved it. It was just fantastic. It was the best time of my life.
What kind of life were you living? Were you really living with wolves?
Well, I did for 2 months, actually, yeah, but not for the majority of the time that I was there. I was there for a year and a half and I was working as a wildlife rehabilitator, which is essentially kind of being like a wildlife vet. You're providing medical care to injured and orphaned wildlife. And I was only supposed to be at this centre where I was working for 9 weeks. I just went as an intern. And then I had plans to go off and work with wolves in the Rocky Mountains. And I did do that for a couple of months, but I just really missed the wildlife rehabilitation side of it, the medical side of it so much that I ended up going back to that place, and I was there a year and a half later still. And I mean, you ask about the lifestyle. It's a sort of lifestyle joined with career choice. It's not an office job. There's no 9 to 5 with working with wildlife, especially as a rehabber. You've got injured animals coming in at any time of the day. You're on call. You have people who could call you at any time saying there's been a bear that's been hit by a car and it needs help, or a deer's been hit by a car, or somebody's just found a litter of baby raccoons under their shed and they're about to die. And you always have to be on hand to look after these things.
Was there any opportunity to have the kind of life that a normal young woman of that age would have? I mean, no mobile phone signals, no Wi-Fi.
Oh God, I did actually have Wi-Fi. I did have internet, so I could Skype home every now and then. But with the time difference, it was never really that easy to do, to be honest. No, I didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have a car. You should have seen what I looked like. I was just wild. I mean, I didn't have a haircut for about 2 years. I didn't go clothes shopping for years and years. But you sort of lose all of that. When I lived in Newcastle, and I was kind of immersed in all that sort of lifestyle as you would be as a student. But I left all of that behind when I moved to Canada. You start to focus on the simpler and really, to me, more important things in life. And it was wonderful. It had such a simplicity to it. I never watched the news. I had no idea what was going on in the world. And I actually really liked it. My friends and I would often say that World War III could have been going on while we worked at this rehab centre and we wouldn't have had a clue because we just didn't have any contact with the outside world whatsoever. We lived in a bubble.
I can see how that would be appealing. Was that the time that kind of focused your mind for how you wanted to live your life when you came home?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, when I was there, that's when I decided, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be working with wildlife hands-on, and I want to be encouraging people to have a proactive approach to conservation. This is really, really important to me. And when you're seeing it firsthand, the effect that humans have on wildlife, and you're the person who then has to spend really the next few weeks, months, or even years trying to rehabilitate an animal because somebody has shot it or set a trap carelessly and accidentally caught this animal, or they've hit it by a car, you really then start to think about conservation quite seriously, and how can we start to reduce these incidences, these mortalities and these conflicts between humans and wildlife, especially as the global population is growing so much and the wildlife just can't compete with it. And that's what I have decided to continue doing as a career.
And that's where the whale watching in Scotland came in.
Yeah, well, I moved home and I've been back home for about 4 weeks, and it was a bit of a sort of reality shock getting back into the UK after, as you say, a year and a half without a phone or seeing my friends or my family, to suddenly having all of that back. I mean, it was great, but I was in a bit of shock, and I just thought, right, I need some wilderness again. Okay, the closest place I can think of getting is Scotland. So I Googled wildlife jobs in Scotland, and I just found a whale watching job in Oban, and I thought, hey, that sounds quite fun. That'd be quite nice to do for the summer. I applied for that and I got it, and I moved up here, and 2 years later I'm still here. It's a fantastic place to live, and it's so vibrant in the summer. We've got such a wide diversity of wildlife. When I lived in Canada, I just kept thinking, God, we don't have anything in Great Britain that even compares to this. But now I'm living on the west coast of Scotland, I see we do. It's just in more isolated areas, and we just don't really know where it is.
You're seeing at first hand some of the most extraordinary wildlife, not just whales.
No, it's not just whales. We've got bottlenose dolphins, we have porpoise. They look like small dolphins, basically. We've got golden eagles, white-tailed sea eagles, otters, common seals, grey seals. There's lots of different stuff around here. It's a very vibrant place, and people come here from all over the world to see some of Britain's most charismatic wildlife, and that's what I take them out to see. It's not just British people who want to come out on our boat. People who've come over from other parts of Europe or North America to specifically come out and see this wildlife as part of their holiday.
And for a bit more human contact, Sarah, you've also been sailing from Newcastle to Amsterdam, though it's not the destination that interests you so much as what you see on the journey.
Yeah, for sure. I really like working in an international atmosphere, and I think my previous experiences reflect that. And I quite like to have a bit more of an adventurous 9 to 5 than the regular office job. I've worked on a ship for 6 months going from Newcastle to Amsterdam, and on board I was a senior wildlife officer running a wildlife centre, and we take about 1,300 passengers, and I look out for whales and dolphins on that crossing as well. And when I first started the job, I just sort of thought the North Sea, I really don't think I'm going to see much in there whatsoever, but I was so surprised. I was really humbled by the amount of wildlife that we saw last summer. We were seeing dolphins leaping out of the water at the side of the boat. We were seeing minke whales jumping out of the water, and we even had humpback whales, which I don't know if there's ever been many records of them in the North Sea whatsoever, breaching in front of the ship. I mean, people go to California, to see these sorts of things and pay thousands of pounds for whale watching cruises to see humpback whales, and we were just thinking, wow, we've got this right here in the North Sea on our coast. I'll be starting back on board the ship in a couple of weeks' time, so I spend 2 weeks on the ship, and then I have 2 weeks shore leave, and in my 2 weeks shore leave I come back to Oban, and then I'm back on the ship again. So it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So for half the month I'm in the North Sea, the other half of the month I'm on the west coast of Scotland.
Can you ever see a time when you'll stop getting a kick out of seeing all this wildlife?
I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm never going to. I'm always going to want to have adventure and have this kind of lifestyle. But other times I just wish I could sit down and watch TV and just go out with friends and maybe just go shopping and just do regular stuff like going to the cinema or something like that. It's so rare that I ever get to do that, or going out for a drink with friends. I honestly can't remember the last time I did that. And it gets a bit tiring doing this sort of thing all the time, but it's what I want to do, and it's what drives me to continue doing it. I'm going to spend so much of my life working that I want it to be doing something worthwhile.
And something that you love.
And something that I love, absolutely. And that's what I really found when I was in Canada especially. I spent days and days looking after wildlife. I would stay up frequently until 3 o'clock in the morning, bottle feeding baby raccoons or whatever animal I had to look after. I had 16 bear cubs at one point, and I had 12 baby raccoons, 7 fawns. I had to teach otters how to swim, which isn't actually
How
as
do
fun.
you teach an otter how to swim?
Well, that's a really good question, right? Because I had visions in my mind of teaching these otters how to swim, and I sort of thought, this is going to be fantastic. I had visions of Disney music playing in the background and me in a bikini with the otters combing my hair and maybe a cocktail or something. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. They didn't want to learn how to swim. And I had 7 otter babies, which, they bite, and they're not wanting to be taught how to swim.
Were you in the water with them?
I was in a freezing cold pool in chest lost weight. It's not quite the wonderful Disney image that I'd imagined. With otters that did not want to learn to swim, and the mother in the wild would have the same problem. She'd just grab them by the scruff of the neck and drag them in. And once they're in, they're absolutely fine. They don't really have to be taught that much. It comes to them fairly naturally, but it's that initial getting them into the water at first. It might have had something to do with the temperature of it. It was pretty cold. But I grabbed this otter by his scruff and dragged him through the water. And my boss shouted to me, just let him go, he'll be fine. I let him go. He sank. A few bubbles came up. But after a few seconds, he was swimming around and doing his own thing, and they picked it up really quickly. There's lots of different things like that you'd have to be doing. And for me, it's always going to be worthwhile. And by saving one animal, you're not going to change the world, but you can change the world for that animal. And that's the thing that's important to me. And that's why I wanted to stay in Canada for as long as I did, working as a rehabilitator.
Somehow I can never see you becoming a city girl.
I don't think so. No, not yet.
That was Sara Frost, a terrific woman. And Jane, now you know how you teach an otter to swim.
Yes, yeah, she made it sound like that it was going to be the Little Mermaid in her head, wasn't it? And then it was this kind of dark, dank, depressive experience.
Well, there's a longer version of that interview with Sarah on our website, bbc.co.uk/Radio Scotland. And Sarah told me that she doesn't mind living in rural areas cut off from mobile phone coverage. Well, that might just be as well, because Scotland has very few of them, or has a few of them. So should we make that a selling point?